All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we are talking about the new president of Brigham Young University, Shane Reese. There had been some talk out there that this is something that was going to happen this year, and then a lot of whispers started happening these last few days. And of course, when Elder Holland was announced as the speaker, many started speculating that there was going to be a change in the administration, and there was. So Shane Reese, who is the academic vice president at Brigham Young University, is going to be the new president of BYU, the 14th president of BYU, starting on May 1st of this year. Now, I want to go over a couple of things here. We talk about BYU quite a bit on this channel, and we have a little bit of background on this. And so I want to talk about how the press is covering this. Who is Shane Reese? And is this a big positive for people that are hoping that BYU can not only root out racism, but root out radicalism? And or is it a negative, right? And so a lot of people are already contacting me. What's going on? Is this the right move? What do you think? Who am I? But hey, I've got an opinion. I want to go to the two articles. We're going to start with the Deseret News, and then we're going to go to the Salt Lake Tribune. You can see here the headline from the Deseret News: New University President Named at BYU. And then here is the subtitle, so to speak. A vice president and statistics professor who directed the BYU Committee on Race, Equity, and Belonging will be the school's 14th president. That is a very interesting tagline. Very interesting tagline. So he's the vice president of statistics, a professor. He's been the academic vice president. But what they really are focused on here, and the Salt Lake Tribune does the same thing, is that he directed the BYU Committee on Race, Equity, and Belonging. First of all, for those of you who are concerned about that, I understand where you're coming from. However, I would recommend that you look at where that has ended up. We do not have a DEI office at BYU. That is not what the Office of Belonging is. I know people involved with that. I know the efforts that are being made to push away from the DEI that the world knows, that is in just about every institution out there in the United States, and how strongly they're trying to stay away from that. Now, can they do that? I don't know, but I know the effort is certainly there. And the guy running the Office of Belonging, which is what we've ended up with, not the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, or the name of the committee, the Office of Race, Equity, and Belonging, but the Office of Belonging. That is an important thing to understand, is they did curtail the naming and the verbiage behind this office and ended up with the Office of Belonging. Again, I've said this before, belonging is not the best word in the world, but it's a lot better than race, equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? So there's a statement that's made even in the title of the office. Secondly, the man who is running that office is Carl Hernandez, and I think that he is really the right guy to do this, and have been very impressed with everything that he has said and done and the way he has led this office so far. And so what you kind of see here so far, keep our fingers crossed, is that this is kind of a, hey, yeah, we see that the institutions in the U.S., especially in academia, have moved toward diversity, equity, inclusion. This is BYU's brand of this, and it is different. Now, there are plenty there in the faculty and administration who don't want it to be different, but it is. And I think as long as you have the right president in place at BYU and the right, person leading that office, I think you can count on that having at least some pushback on the tenets, the teachings, the practices, and policies of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we've unfortunately become accustomed to in the United States. So even though this is the tagline here for Deseret News, and we can go over to the Salt Lake Tribune and get almost the same thing. Here's the headline from the Salt Lake Tribune. LDS Apostle Jeffrey Holland announces leader of Race, Equity, and Belonging panel as BYU's new president. Okay, stop and think about that for a minute. Why is everybody fixated on this? I've just gone over how there's been a pushback on this at BYU, and they're not going along with everything else. And yet here you have, and of course I think this one is, this is Peggy Fletcher Stack. So, you're going to get a certain bent view on this. But the other one is Tad Walsh. Not sure exactly what you're going to get on that from him. He's a very good reporter. But it's interesting, isn't it, that is what they use. And here's my take on this, just my take, no knowledge of this, is that it follows right along with what happened with the Respect for Marriage Act with the church and the PR department and how they look at these things. These messages are not for members of the church, unfortunately, right? These messages, this messaging is for the world. And so to me, what they're saying is, as they put these talking points out there, because the church certainly, and BYU certainly put these talking points out there, is, hey, look, here's our bona fides of being in the world of academia. And so we want you to know that this is the man who headed the Committee on Race, Equity, and Belonging. And so, odd, isn't it? It's just odd that is what is brought up in both of these articles to start off with. But I wanted to offer some clarity on that. He did head this panel up, right? He did head this up. And there are some good things that they found. There's some good things that they found, but look at where it has gone. That's what you need to look at. Proof is in the pudding. By their fruits ye shall know them. And this is where this has gone so far. And I have heard only great things about Shane Reese. And in fact, last night I was talking to my wife at dinner and saying, hey, okay, well, tomorrow Elder Holland is speaking at the devotional. Looks like there might be a change. And she said, well, who do you think it's going to be? If they make the change, who's it going to be? And I said, I don't know. But if it's from the inside, I hope it's Shane Reese, is what I said. And so this is the guy that I would hope to be there. To me, and I've put this on social media, from all that I know, take that for what it's worth, Shane Reese is the right guy. And it's a home run to me. I keep our fingers crossed here that he is able to somehow push against the religion of academia and the incursion of these ideologies into the campus at BYU, because it's as much as they've tried to do this, it's still there and it's still fomenting, right? So a couple points here that we're going to get going off of the Deseret News article. Ted Walsh is noting that Elder Holland said it was noteworthy that Reese, like Worthen, is a homegrown president who earned bachelor's and master's degrees at BYU in statistics. Worthen earned his bachelor in law degrees at BYU. So they want to go homegrown with this. I think that's a good approach. I think that's the first thing you want to do. People need to understand what we are about and have had that experience here. I think that's important. And then we get here, Reese has served as academic vice president. In many ways, that's kind of like the number two guy since June 2019. During that time, he directed the BYU Committee on Race, Equity, and Belonging, which found that the university needed to root out individual and systemic racism. The committee offered 26 recommendations, and Reese and others have begun to implement them. Fine, that's great. Again, it's just so odd that is what they are focused on here. It's why is that the talking point? And it freaks people out. Again, to me, the messaging is outward, not inward. Be that right, be that wrong, the messaging is outward. And that's why it's disturbing to some people when they read this. Walsh says that Reese's appointment is an indication he has earned deep trust from church leaders, the university administration, and faculty while serving as the academic vice president. That is everything that I have heard. He has delivered 5 major addresses in that position. I recommend that you read them. In fact, I'm going to put at least one of those on there, on the description box, one of his more recent ones. And you'll get a flair for who he is and what he wants. And then we get to this, and this is very obvious to me, going back to Elder Holland's 2021 address, the Musket address, which was really the second century address that he was focusing on from President Spencer W. Kimball. Got another episode coming out this week on that. Here's what Reese had said. He said that BYU has a clearer sense of mission than most institutions of higher education, and referred multiple times to late church president Spencer W. Kimball's second century address at BYU in 1975. I'm going to put that link in the description box as well. This is what Elder Holland was talking about. That was even the name of his talk, was addressing this second century address from Spencer W. Kimball. And in this address, when you read this, you'll see the focus that Spencer W. Kimball has on the mission of BYU, on its unique mission, that it needs to be carved out away from the rest of academia. And there have been forces recently, very strongly recently, that have been trying to pull BYU away from that mission. And it's hard, right? It's a knife's edge that you have to walk on this if they're going to try and accomplish what BYU, the church apparently, and wants for BYU to accomplish. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Now, before I get to the Salt Lake Tribune article, I want, in the rest of this article, they kind of talk about Reese as a statistician. Did I get that right? As a statistician, right? And how he uses models to predict things going in the future. And in fact, even nuclear bombs, they talked about. And he does a lot in sports. He loves to use stats to predict scores and other things in sports. He's a sports fan. It's another reason why I like him. But if I were to say, based on things that I know about him and who he is, things he's done, things that he has said, then I would say, okay, with those stats that I have, I could at least make a prediction that Shane Reese is going to follow the track that Elder Holland and now Elder Gilbert have made in moving BYU closer to its mission, and being that unique place, rooting out the radicalism, rooting out a lot of these pernicious ideologies, with a concern about the experience and teaching that is offered on campus to young BYU students. I think that we're going to continue to see a change, kind of a horseshoe, right, coming back toward these rooted ideas that Spencer W. Kimball had in that 1975 address. Keep our fingers crossed. None of us can know that. That is a prediction based on some knowledge. But I think that's where this is going. One thing that Peggy Fletcher Stack brings in here in her article is that as academic vice president, so if you're worried about the race, equity, and belonging panel or commission that was put together that he headed, she notes that as academic vice president, he also was the author of a letter defending BYU's decision to cancel gender-affirming voice therapy for transgender students. Reese had said that the move was a religious mission-based decision. So based on the religion, based on the restored gospel, based on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its policies, procedures, and doctrine, he was the author of a letter defending that decision to remove that voice therapy for those that are in transgender transitioning at BYU that had been offered there. So keep that in mind as well. I'll put a link to that letter as well, or at least an article on that letter as we go forward. Here's what's interesting is that she doesn't go any further into that here, right? That's what's kind of interesting. It's all kind of like a big, this is all great. Look at what we've got here. This changes here. But I have a feeling you're going to hear more about that defense of that letter in the future as people try to critique new President Reese in his position and some of the decisions that he will be making. He will have he's got a great attitude. He sees opportunity everywhere. He should. He will have some tough decisions to make, and it's not going to be easy. I hope he is able to hang on to the direction that they need to go. I think he will. This is from Shane Reese's BYU speech last year, 2022. I believe that this was in August. Yes, August 22nd, 2022, called Becoming New Creatures. You can see more of a reason why I like him, right? Number one, he refers to Jonathan Haidt and does it in the proper way. He's not just regurgitating phrases here. He reads Jonathan Haidt. That's important. That's really important. Jonathan Haidt is at the forefront of the problems that we find on campuses nationwide. Secondly, he refers to Tocqueville. That's pretty cool. That's a major positive. And then moving down beyond that, there is something that Spencer W. Kimball had mentioned in his second century speech about gospel methodology. Now, President Worthen at the time in August didn't mention much about this. In fact, he said, I don't really know what that means. And Shane Reese comes in here and goes directly to this when he talks about gospel methodology. Referring to President Spencer W. Kimball's talk, he quotes, in some instances, this is what he goes to, we must be willing to break with the educational establishment, not foolishly or cavalierly, but thoughtfully and for good reason, in order to find gospel ways to help mankind. Gospel methodology, concepts, and insights can help us to do what the world cannot do in its own frame of reference. In other words, we can't be like the rest of academia. President Kimball goes on here, quoted by incoming President Reese, quote, in some ways the church educational system, CES, in order to be unique in the years that lie ahead, may have to break with certain patterns of the educational establishment. When the world has lost its way on matters of principle, we have an obligation to point the way. We can, as Brigham Young hoped we would, be a people of profound learning pertaining to the things of the world, but without being tainted by what he regarded as the pernicious atheistic influences, hello, critical social justice, that flood in unless we are watchful. Our scholars, therefore, must be sentries as well as teachers. And then he brings this up. And this tells you kind of, again, the direction that I think, looking all the way back to Elder Holland, Elder Gilbert, and now President Reese, are focused on. He says, I want to start by talking about how we can become new institutionally. As I mentioned, as a President's Council, we have been revisiting our strategic plan in order to help the entire university become, as an institution, a new creature in Christ. I'm going to make a suggestion, if I may, and that is that when new President Reese comes in May, that he takes a very close look at the mission statements for each department and college. And what would be a really interesting task would be to go back and look at the evolution of those mission statements over the last 25, 30 years. You're going to see something there. I've done this superficially, not in depth, but you see a definite gradual change from gospel principle, Christ-centered mission statements to what is going to please the accreditation arms and organizations and the diversity, equity, inclusion principles of the world. And if you listen to him today, he talked about three focuses for the university: family, religion, and constitution. right? This comes from a recent devotional that you may have seen, where President Oaks and Elder Clark Gilbert, combined gave a devotional, and they emphasized these 3 points. Now, there's a lot more here in that talk from 2022, but I'm going to put that link in the description box. I just wanted to make sure I got in some of those points there so that we get a little bit more of a feel for the direction of incoming President Shane Reese. And then hiring practices. And this is something that has changed over the last year or two already. And maybe there will be more changes here. But in that address, he also stressed the importance of ensuring that new faculty hires and each department's criteria for promotion. That is key. I have been, unfortunately, privy to some of these promotional issues here, issues of promotion sometimes, and what holds people back and what people are trying to hold people back with. A lot of talk about racism, a lot of talk about exclusion and diversity, equity, inclusion when it comes to promotion. That's the way it is in academia, and BYU and many there at BYU have tried to make that a very strong issue in some very unfortunate ways. And then we get this in his address here today. He says, "We as a university announce today that we will make a strategic investment in fortifying the institutions of family, religion, and constitutional government. We see these institutions as critical to society and important to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." That is music to many people's ears, that we can go back to these things. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. They've actually got someone here quoted from BYU School of Family Life, which is interesting. But we'll see what happens in that School of Family Life, which is under the social sciences there at BYU. And if that is really true, is it going to be focused more on family and the doctrine of the family, as Elder Holland asked for and was mocked for in his address in 2021. And then lastly here, he says, "We expect that BYU will become a leader among great universities in the world, yet will retain its uniqueness." That's the trajectory. And the problem is can you do it? Is it possible? I mean, it's a great goal. We can be like everybody else without being like everybody else. We can compete with everyone else without competing with everyone else. It's not an easy task. Everybody would love us to be the Harvard of the West while still retaining our uniqueness and holding on to family, religion, the gospel, and constitutional principles. That's easier said than done. And that's where the issue has been. We have seen here in the last couple of years some real efforts, some real changes that go everything from policies and procedures on campus to hiring to the interview process with ecclesiastical leaders, a number of things. There's a dozen or more policy changes that have come about in the last couple of years, and I think we'll continue to see a number of those changes. We may see at the very beginning of May some of these additional policies I would expect that will be put in place. It may be behind the scenes, but I think that's what we'll see. I'm very excited about this. We'll keep our fingers crossed that this is helping BYU accomplish its amazing mission. And for those that are tied to Brigham Young University currently, in the past, alumni and others, I think that this is good news. And I was very excited to hear that it was Shane Reese. Thanks for listening.